Character data, the fundamental particles of an RPG. Yes, there are some games that don't do it this way, but we'll get into those some other time. Let's talk about the traditional diceful RPGs that follow the usual model established in the Gygaxian days. One of the first things I do when I look at an RPG is I check out the character sheet. That tends to relay a lot about how focused and cogent the game's design was. A lot of clutter is a warning sign, as is a lot of sparsity. Do not misunderstand me. I love a good pickup game like Ninja Burger, where there are 4 stats, a fistful of d6s, and you're done. But I wish to remark right now upon games which intend to be taken seriously, and which intend to be played for more than one session. Now I have never actually played OD&D, so this character sheet is a bit of a mystery to me. My parents hadn't even really met each other by the time this game had been published, so I was nary even a twinkle in my mother's eye. It's interesting to note how little data is actually here, and I'm curious how it actually played. I don't really even know. I really don't care a lot, which is why I still don't know as of the recording of this video. Yeah, mostly I'm just content to appeal to the opinion of Lindy Beige on this one. I did play a tiny bit of AD&D when I was too young to really understand what's going on. I have since in my adulthood gone back and reviewed this, and I think the most remarkable thing about the game was that they say from the outset that none of this data should really matter. I remember the rulebook actually explicitly stating, the player's handbook says, you need to be super hyper ultra mega clever because if you ever actually roll the dice, you're gonna die. Something to that effect. So they're like, hey, record all this information down, of which there seems to be a great deal more than back in these days. I guess that's why it's advanced, right? Record all this data and then do your best to make it not matter. You know, RPGs were still growing up in these days. We still didn't really understand what we were doing. I forgive a lot in AD&D that I would never forgive a modern game for doing. Second edition is where I consider my RPG career to have begun. I played a crap ton of this system. Mostly Ravenloft and Dark Sun. I was still mostly content just to do what the DM told me to do what the rules told me to. I was immersed in the narrative, which is definitely a good thing. And I really didn't think a whole lot about it. Of course, there was THAC0. What the hell, D&D? But I got over it because I was enjoying myself still. But then, in my late teens, TSR published this game, and it opened my eyes. One of the most compelling things about this game was that all of these ability scores directly contributed to the main flow of gameplay. Unlike this, where your stats were kind of all over the place, and sometimes they'd make you look up on a chart what this stat meant, and sometimes it just didn't mean stuff. But over here, if I had a strength score of 10, I would want to roll a d20, and I would want that d20 to be less than or equal to 10 in order to succeed at something strength-related. And then, with these skills, they didn't have arbitrary bonuses for different things. Every single roll had a skill associated with it. And your chances of success were directly derived from the ability score that the skill fell under. So if I was doing athletics, it fell under strength, I would have a marginal success rate of 10. So if I rolled less than or equal to 10, it would be a marginal success. I had a good success rate of half of my ability score. That would be a 5 if it were 10. And then I would have an amazing success rate of 1/4 my ability score, so 2. Since it's rounded down. Every step of the way, I knew exactly what I needed. If I was trained in a skill, I knew exactly what kind of rolls I needed. Then they would adjust the difficulty with their little step penalties by saying you have to roll a d20 plus one of these other kinds of dice, depending on how difficult your situation is. The lesson that I learned from Alternity was the virtue of directness. When 3rd edition was published, I started to experience the indirection fatigue. When you create your character, you roll up your ability scores. But then, after you've used them to derive your modifier, you don't care about those ability scores much at all. Everything else in this character sheet is referencing the modifier. Your saving throws, when you attack, and when you roll your skills, the modifier is the only contributing aspect. When we design an RPG, we are asking our players to do some bookkeeping. A glance at the character sheet will tell us something about the kinds of bookkeeping we are being asked to do. The player needs to know that the things that they are recording on the character sheet directly contribute to the gameplay. If you don't have a direct contribution to gameplay in the bookkeeping you are doing, it just becomes annoying. As our games have matured, we have done different levels and different kinds of bookkeeping, some of them more meaningful than others. If we design a game where the things that we record do have an obvious significance to the game, it becomes far less laborious for the player to scribble all these things down. This is principally why I began to hate D&D in my early 20s. I thought it was a garbage system because the amount of bookkeeping you did versus the amount of actual gameplay that bookkeeping contributed to seemed disproportionate. It was especially bad back here in Advanced D&D when the rulebook explicitly stated, yeah, you're going to record a bunch of stuff maybe, but you should try to not play with it. So when you design your RPG, ask yourself, why are we asking the player to write this down? What is the player going to gain from it? That will help give you and your players a lot of direction and help keep the game running smoothly.